As much as the news tells us to worry about Putin and Will Smith and second booster shot recommendations from the CDC, there's a widening gap between what Americans actually care about and what we're told to care about. And the polling shows it. And yeah, take your polling with the appropriate grain of salt, but we're not talking about specific numbers or margins of error here. We're just talking about what Americans are actually concerned with versus what the White House and the media are. Recent polling shows top issues for Democrats like climate change, race and ethnicity, and coronavirus are actually bottom-tier, low-priority issues for most Americans. To be fair, according to that polling, more Americans actually do care about Putin than I originally credited, but apparently mostly to the extent that the war in Ukraine is impacting their obvious top issues: the economy, jobs, and inflation. And there's another item on that list of Americans' priorities that's not far behind, but often much less emphasized by media and politicians: immigration. According to recent Pew Research polling, half of Americans rate the issue as very important heading into the midterm elections. And for a president whose approval ratings keep excavating for deeper depths, disapproval on the immigration issue is one of the bigger digs. Overwhelmingly, poll respondents say the country is heading in the wrong direction by a gigantic 37-point margin, according to March polling aggregation. And on no single issue is Biden's job approval worse than on immigration, 24 points underwater. That's worse than respondents grade him on other top issues like the economy, foreign policy, and coronavirus. And it makes sense. The last time the issue made major headlines, it was a disaster at the border that diverted attention away from the disaster just prior in Afghanistan. And when you're responsible for a disaster, your best friend is a scapegoat, and so the White House and the Department of Homeland Security made one. Recall it was September in Del Rio, Texas, when thousands of Haitian migrants were illegally crossing the U.S.-Mexico border over a dam in the Rio Grande. It's estimated 30,000 made that crossing. At the peak, 15,000 were living in a camp under a bridge across the river. Reportedly, 2,000 were sent back to Haiti. 8,000 voluntarily returned to Mexico. At the time of this reporting in September, over 12,000 were still awaiting a court hearing. What came of those hearings and those unaccounted for, well, your guess is as good as mine. But of course, the scandal was not the little Port-au-Prince shanty town that was abandoned as a trash heap for our cleanup, apparently a cost passed on to the local sheriff's department assisted by charitable donations. Instead, the headline scandal was a made-up inference from a misunderstood photograph. Shocking video shows U.S. Border Patrol using whips on Haitian migrants, the headlines read at the time. The claim of shocking video is itself a stretch upon a stretch. The outrage was based largely on this photo allegedly showing a whipping. The supposed video shows no whipping at all, just a twirl, but Jen Psaki still fanned the flames of outrage with reporters.
I have seen some of the footage. I don't think anyone seeing that footage would think it was acceptable or appropriate.
Nobody would think it's acceptable or appropriate unless they spent 5 minutes looking into the facts of the matter. And the days after, the photographer who captured that image said, yeah, that was not a whipping. Those are the horse's reins, not whips. And during my time photographing the incident, I never saw any border agent whip anybody. Agents and border officials speaking with media afterward said that twirling motion is a technique for steering horses, not whipping people. But of course, the president couldn't wait for the information about how his own police forces operate. He needed a scapegoat immediately, and so he made one. He promised the border agents involved would pay.
Horses barely running them over, people being strapped. It's outrageous. I promise you those people will pay. They will be, an investigation underway now, and there will be consequences. It's an embarrassment, but it's beyond an embarrassment. It's dangerous. It's wrong.
Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas followed, promising an investigation to be concluded within days or weeks, the results of which we will all get to see for ourselves publicly.
The highest levels of the CBP Office of Professional Responsibility are leading the investigation, which will conclude quickly. The results of the investigation I will make public.
But now, it's not days later, it's not weeks later, it's 6 months later, and there is still no public report available. There's no private report either. In fact, there are no investigation conclusions at all, because the investigation remains ongoing, as the tortoise and the snail blew by it weeks ago. But it turns out Biden was right about a few things during his initial commentary, at least accidentally. It is profoundly embarrassing, and those border agents did pay with consequences. They actually are still paying. The agents involved are still on desk duty, taken off border work throughout all the time since, for no other reason than the president and the Department of Homeland Security don't want the embarrassment of admitting they got the whole story completely wrong. These guys aren't off the job for the good of the country. They're off the job to help a failing president scrape whatever he can from the absolute bottom of the credibility barrel. In other words, it's more important to this White House to save political face than it is to tell the truth and to put all resources we have available on a border that needs them. And that is a large-scale issue. Even if this is a scandal of only a handful of border agents in the context of thousands, the prioritizing of political narrative over reality is going to get yet another reality check, because if reports and predictions are correct, we're about to face an influx of illegal border crossings on a scale 10 times that of what we saw in Del Rio last fall. A report circulated earlier in the week, and now the CDC has confirmed Friday that Biden and the CDC plan to end the Title 42 policy at the end of May, a decision partly driven by recent court rulings challenging its legality and partly driven by political pressure among Democrats who want less restrictions at the border. Title 42 refers to a border policy that's been in place since March 2020, the onset of coronavirus. Under the authorization of a 1940s public health law, the Trump administration created a policy of immediate expulsion for illegal border crossers without opportunity to apply for asylum, the justification being their presence created risk of viral spread. It's a policy that has continued under Biden to present, and I was a little surprised to learn that of the 1.7 million immediate expulsions of illegal immigrants in the 2 years since, 70% of them came under Biden, though of course Joe has had a little more time under the policy's presence. As a policy, though, it has created an interesting divide among Democrats in that it puts two high party priorities at odds. On the one hand, corona fear, but on the other, all but open borders. Something's got to win, though, and it looks like for most Democrats, it's the open borders. Chuck Schumer says Title 42 has been a disastrous policy for immigrant families seeking asylum from the horrors of their own countries, calling for its end. Joe Manchin and other moderate Democrats are advocating the policy stay in place in light of the new Omicron BA2 subvariant. And Arizona Democrats Kirsten Sinema and Mark Kelly say they're open to ending Title 42, but not without a comprehensive plan to manage what is likely to be a surge of border crossings in response, because the policy change means illegal border crossers can now apply for asylum and hang out and wait. As a matter of formal policy, after a court battle, they are required to wait in Mexico, but as a practical matter, with this many people on the border, it's fair to speculate a lot of things might happen otherwise. And to be specific in quantifying that surge, we're talking numbers well into the six figures almost immediately. An experienced DHS source speaking with Fox correspondent Hillary Vaughn says Homeland Security is expecting as many as 500,000 migrants within 6 weeks following the policy change. At a rate of well over 300,000 a month, that would far exceed the largest ever volumes of about 200,000 a month last summer and back in 2000. It would be on a scale never seen in our country's history, and this source says DHS is ill-equipped to handle such a scenario. One idea reportedly under consideration is to send medical personnel from Veterans Affairs to assist at the border, as though anything less politically popular could ever be conceived. Sorry, Mr. Veteran injured at the Kabul airport, you'll have to wait. There are made-up Haitian whip wounds at the border to tend to. Now, of course, all of that is speculative, but if there's anything that's just behind death and taxes as life's guarantees, it's border crossings and Biden incompetence. So I'm inclined to believe that the worst-case scenario is more probable than not, without much reason for optimism. So I went to the only place that could possibly provide some of it for this story or this administration, CNN. And here it is. Sure, we're expecting a big increase in migrants at the border, but this time is gonna be different. Here's why. Yes, it's correct. There is a giant horde waiting at the border for the go-ahead, but this time, it's it's going to be hard for officials to claim they didn't see it coming. See, in the past, we've seen surprises at the border, but this time, administration officials have repeatedly told reporters they are preparing for the possibility of a significant increase in border crossings. There's even a planning document this time. This isn't going to get screwed up because there's a plan. Well, in the context of this White House, absolutely winging it is way more reassuring than a planning document. They had a planning document for the Afghanistan withdrawal. They had a planning document for inflation. They had a planning document for gas prices. They had no excuse for surprise on any of these issues, and yet surprise has been the excuse for all of them. Wow, all those Taliban territorial gains sure are surprising. Wow, this persistent inflation sure is surprising. We expected transitory. Last November, Biden said, wow, did you ever think you'd be paying this much for a gallon of gas? In some parts of California, they're paying $4.50 a gallon. And now, only 5 months later, you'd say, wow, because that's a screaming deal, not a ripoff. He's now desperately strategizing to get California prices down to that level. There's nothing different about a Biden plan to confront a looming crisis. The only thing that's different is expecting that plan to produce positive results. It's much more reasonable to assume that the damage is the plan until this White House surprises us with anything otherwise. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Parler, that is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.